Hey, welcome to episode 179 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Freeman, and today oh my gosh. My guest today is an intrepid explorer who I believe would impress even Indiana Jones. And I'm going to tell you more about him, but first this.
Today's guest, David O'Hara.
David O'Hara's research has taken him to the forests of Guatemala, the reefs of Belize, and the tundra of Africa. He teaches environmental humanities in Greece, Spain, and Morocco. Oh, I should have told you all to get out your world atlas before I read his bio. And he's also a college professor specializing in the plethora of philosophies and, and teaches environmental ethics and law at Augustana College in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He is the author of Downstream and Narnia in the fields of Arbol, the environmental vision of C.S. Lewis. Please help me welcome to Awkwardly Awesome Podcast on this beautiful Wednesday, David O'Hara. Woo!
Thank you,
David, welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I really appreciate that. That's one of the coolest introductions I've ever had.
And you, thanks. I'm glad you liked it, and I must say you have one of the coolest backgrounds ever. All your books are just an amazing background.
I like to tell my students that the reason I have all these books here, sometimes they're intimidated by walking into an office and seeing this many books, but the reason I have all these books is that I have a bad memory. So if I could remember all the stuff in the books, I wouldn't need them, but I can't. So that's why I have all the books.
If you could remember all the stuff in your 5,000 books, you would be superhuman.
It would be a superpower, wouldn't it?
Yes. So I was lucky enough to be introduced to you at Carla Abbott's retirement party, who I had on a few weeks ago, and we met once for coffee, and it was utterly fascinating. But I realize I don't know that much about you yet. We're still getting to know each other. So if I had known you a lot longer and knew you when you were 7 years old and asked you, hey, David, what do you think you want to do when you grow up? What would you have said?
Oh, that's a good question. I remember being 7. I grew up in the Catskill Mountains in New York. I lived in the little town of Woodstock. And I remember
you lived in Woodstock.
In Woodstock, yeah. I lived just outside of the town. It's a small town, a couple thousand people, and I lived out in the forest outside the town. And I had a tree fort that I'd built. It was that year was a kind of a big year. This is the year that my parents got divorced, and so it was a big kind of soul searching year, even for a 7-year-old. I went from a Montessori school to my first public school. A lot of really interesting things going on in that time. But I remember asking the very question that you asked me, and what do I want to do? And I gave a bunch of answers. One of them was cowboy. I wanted to be a cowboy. I didn't really know why, but I just liked the idea of being a cowboy. I think I'd seen one on TV, maybe F Troop or something. And I wanted to be archaeologist or an anthropologist as well, because I just loved the idea of digging in the ground and finding things that had been hidden for a long time. There was a little part of me that wanted to be an astronaut as well. My dad had worked with IBM and NASA on one of the space missions that happened in the mid 1960s. And I was born in 1969. So, I was born right around that time when the United States was really doing its peak space exploration, sending people out into space. I think all those things were on my mind. But, at 7 years old, you have the big dreams. You're not really sure, how do I get there? But I don't know. But if I could have been an anthropologist, cowboy, space astronaut, that would have been like my dream.
Wow. So we won't have trouble filling this out. You just gave me like 12 questions to ask you from that. So where did you live before you moved to Woodstock?
I was born in Woodstock, and I lived there for 17 years of my life. So until I went off to college.
Oh, so you were at a Montessori school in Woodstock, and then you changed your public school in Woodstock.
That's right.
I thought maybe you had been in Manhattan and suddenly you were in Woodstock.
Yeah, I lived close enough to Manhattan that my school trips, we could go down to the Bronx Zoo, or we could go to the National Natural History Museum or other museums in New York City. But New York's nice in that you can be that close to the city and also be out in the middle of nowhere in the forest.
So how far is Woodstock from New York City?
In miles, I don't know. I know that I had neighbors who commuted to work in New York City. It's a long commute, an hour and a half to 2 hours, something like that.
But pretty close.
Yeah.
And what's the like, how does, this is a sidebar, but how does the legacy of the famous music festival play into local Woodstock culture?
It's very funny, actually. My father told me once that the town council in Woodstock was presented with the possibility of having this concert in the town. And the town it's in this narrow valley, so there's really not a lot of flat space, even for little league baseball. There were a couple places we could play, but not a lot. And the town council said something like, no way, there could be hundreds, maybe even thousands of people here, so we won't let it happen. So they kept the name of our town, but they moved the concert maybe an hour south to Max Yasgur's farm, which is out on a big level ground. And it's a good thing because they had like 500,000 people show up. There's no way that many people would have fit in our town.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting trivia that Woodstock didn't actually take place in Woodstock.
Yeah, and it's when I was a kid, I'd get these jobs. I worked in the hardware store. I worked in, I was a barista, and I scooped ice cream, and worked in the other little shops. And people would always come in. They say, "We just drove here from New York City. Where was the concert?" And I'd say, "Well, you passed it about 45 minutes after you left the city. We're really glad you're here. Please spend money." And then as you drive back home, you'll pass the place where the concert was.
So Woodstock literally gets accidental tourism.
Yeah, Woodstock is continuing to reap the economic benefit for a concert that took place somewhere else.
Okay, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And on a different note, what was it like being a kid as the space missions were taking place, and knowing that your dad had worked on what had he done on a space shuttle, or what?
I don't remember which mission it was. I should remember this. It was before the space shuttles. I want to say it was one of the Apollo missions. If Dad were here, he would correct me on that, I'm sure. He was working for IBM, and he was he built computers and programmed them. And so each of the spaceships that we sent up into orbit and then around the moon and then to land on the moon had computers on board, and Dad was one of the people assigned from IBM to work with NASA. So he moved to Florida for, I think, a couple of years, year and a half or 2 years, to work with NASA to help them get their computers right.
What was that like as a kid, knowing that your dad was working
I think
on a space?
probably, I don't know, maybe you have this feeling too, Jason, that like you look at what your parents do when you're a little kid and you're like, they're like superheroes.
Yes, I definitely have that feeling, David.
Yeah. Yeah, and your parents, I know your parents. Your parents are great. So I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, I thought Dad was. I still do think Dad is something of a superhero. I mean, I grew up in a town that was full of IBM engineers. There was an IBM plant about 10 miles away, and so most of my friends had at least one parent who was an IBM engineer. So I'd go to friends' houses, and there was always talk of math and science, and most of us had computers pretty early on and learned how to use them early on. And my dad is kind of special in that he's, in addition to being an engineer, who's just really good at both electrical engineering and mechanical engineering. He's a good teacher. He's a musician. He's really good at languages and literature. So I got a pretty good education from my parents. Mom was a political scientist who then became a police officer. So I learned a lot from them.
Oh, there's so many. So how did your mom go from being a political scientist to thinking she wanted, deciding she wanted to be a police officer?
I wish I had a clear answer to like all of my parents' career moves. Part of it is she did that back when I was probably about 6 years old, and I'm sure part of it was as my parents' marriage was falling apart. They'd been married for 17 years, so I'm sure there's history there that I'm not privy to even now. And Mom died a while ago, so I can't ask. But I think that part of it was, just needing to get out of the house. She had 3 kids. I was one of them, and we were all the 3 of us were probably drove her nuts. And she just needed to get out of the house and do something different. And it's funny to think that dealing with criminals would be easier than dealing with three rambunctious children, but it probably was at times. But Mom also had a pretty strong sense of justice. She worked at the Ulster County Sheriff's Department in New York for about 25 years, and for much of her career, she was director of rehabilitation in our county jail. So I would. When she was a single mom, if I was homesick from school, sometimes she would bring me to work with her, and I would actually get to go into the jail and kind of do rounds, deliver mail to the inmates, and make sure everyone was getting what they needed. And I quickly learned that everyone there called her Mother Nancy, at least all the inmates did, almost like she was a nun or something. And she really cared for the people. She wanted to make sure that if somebody came in with a drug addiction, they got drug treatment, rehab. If they came in without education, she helped them to get their GED or to get vocational technical training. If they were illiterate, she wanted to make sure they learned how to read, and she stocked the library. She would go out and organize book drives, and she just did a lot. She poured herself out for people. I remember one time when I was in college, I drove home for the weekend, and I took her out to a local diner a couple miles from the jail where she worked, and kind of between the jail and our house. We're sitting there at the diner table, and this guy walks up to us. He's wearing a black leather jacket. He's got tattoos all over. He just looks gruff. He looks like the kind of guy you see in a movie who's like the next thing he's going to do is like kill you or something. I was terrified. I'm this scrawny 18-year-old, and this big burly guy with a beard and the black jacket comes up and he says Mother Nancy, something like that. And I'm like, bad things are going to happen. And then he says, I owe you my life.
Oh my gosh.
And then he turns to me, and I don't remember his exact words, but he said something like, you'd better respect her. you know, this woman helped me to get off drugs. She helped me to get an education. She helped me to get a job. She helped me to put my marriage back together. And I was like, wow, my mom's a superhero. And also, I mean, I'm terrified by this guy. And at the same time, like, my mom has made a difference in people's lives that she didn't really talk about at home. We got little glimpses of it. I'm guessing, you know, the same could be said of my dad, that he's making these differences that he doesn't brag about. So I'm going to take a moment on your podcast, and thank you for letting me take up a moment and brag about that.
It sounds like a movie could be made entitled Mother Nancy.
I think so. Yeah.
Wow. So one last question from this stage of life. We could just talk about like sometimes you'll be homesick and get to go to jail, and yeah, worked for IBM in this heyday, and you grew up in this community that, well, a lot of people's parents worked for IBM. It sounds amazing, but it's interesting in career choices. 7 you were interested in archaeology, which obviously is very grounded in the earth, and then being an astronaut, which obviously is the complete opposite.
Yeah. I guess, you know, being surrounded by scientists had me broadly interested in science, and being surrounded by curious people helped to foster curiosity in me.
I guess another question from this time of life. How did your interest in books begin?
My mom played a big role in that. You know, back before when my parents were still married, mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she read to us a lot. Getting me involved in a Montessori school, you know, both my parents did that, and that helped a lot too. They had me reading books when I was 2. The Montessori school, the idea is, you know, you learn by playing, and somehow that really just worked for me. So I know that by the time I was 4 or 5 years old, I was reading young adult novels, and that mom just she read to us constantly. Our house was full of books. Our house looked kind of like the office wall behind me, just full of books. But both my parents loved learning. You know, if you go to my dad's house today, his office is wall-to-wall books. There's always a stack of books by his armchair, a stack of books on his nightstand. So I probably caught that from both my parents.
Well, what a neat thing.
Yeah, it's a gift. It's a real gift.
So a lot of people, including me, don't read that much today, because I mean, I guess there's all sorts of reasons for not reading as much. But what do you love about? What do you personally love about reading books?
Oh, so much. Reading books feels to me like entering into another world. I went to the library, the Augustana Library, yesterday, and came back with a tall stack of books. I must have brought out a dozen books.
So you're surrounded by books, and you're going other places to get more books.
Yeah, there are days when I'll read 7 or 8 or 9 books. I just I love.
Sorry, you were breaking up there.
Oh,
there are days what?
There are days when I'll read 7 or 8 or 9 books in a day. I love reading. I love entering into somebody else's world. I just took out this book yesterday. I haven't read it yet. This book was printed in 1893, and it's still there in our library to be taken out. This somebody was thinking this in the 1890s, 1880s, 1890s, and the man who wrote this is now dead, but his thoughts are still here, written with a reader in mind. And I think like many people, I just like to disappear into an adventure. You know, I loved reading The Hobbit, you know, the Narnia stories, and you know, all sorts of other space adventures, sci-fi, fantasy, historic novels. You just, it feels like you get to travel without having to leave home.
Do you read books from cover to cover?
It depends on the book. So a lot of what you see behind me in my office is reference books. I have some books here that are they're books that I used as research when I'm teaching, books on environmental law. If I want to look up a particular case or a particular era, then I look that up. And I won't necessarily read that book from start to finish. I got a whole section of encyclopedias and dictionaries over here for different languages and for cultures and times. When I'm teaching classical Asian philosophy or teaching about Buddhism or something, there's always something that I don't know that I need to look up or refresh my thinking. But yeah, there's always some books that I'm reading through from start to finish. And my speed of reading will vary with the type of book. When I read poetry, I think of poetry as being like either like a hot bath or like a buffet, you know, something that you don't want to race through. You want to just sit back and allow yourself to enjoy it. I say hot bath because sometimes I want to steep in it, like just let it soak through me. And I don't need to read it all. I want to read a little bit and let those words wash over me. Or a buffet, because sometimes if I've got an anthology of poetry, a chapbook, I might open to just one poem and read that. And I don't feel the need to read them all, because that you can even cheapen the poems by just racing through them. But if I'm reading a book of engineering or math or science, that one I will probably read really quickly at first, because I want to get the broad landscape. It's almost like unfolding a map. I want to see the whole map at first. And then I'm going to go back to that book and look closely at one area. And that's like, I've unfolded this map of, say, Africa. And now I want to look and see, what is the landscape of Morocco like? So I do the same thing with books. Some of them novels, of course, I just read from start to finish, and I let myself do it at a leisurely pace. But technical books, often I'm going fast, so I get the landscape and then settle down in one or two spots.
So you couldn't read, or are you a speed reader? Like,
I suppose that I am. I've never been formally trained in speed reading, but when I was doing my graduate work, I was a grad student for 7 years. I had to read a lot of books. Because, you know, when you're doing a Ph.D., you're effectively becoming the world's expert in something. It might be something very small that most people don't care about, and that was true in my case. But you got to read a lot, because you got to know what everyone else who has talked about this topic has said. Those 7 years, I forget. I must have read 7, 8, 9,000 books, something like that.
what?
Yeah,
Wow.
and I mean, when I say read them, sometimes you're kind of zipping through them just to, like I said, get the lay of the land and figure out, is this a book I need to read really closely, or is this a book where I need to get through it and figure out whether it's related to my work or not? So I read closely a very small fraction of those, but kind of read every page fast of pretty much all of those books.
So in a world that's becoming completely complex inherently because everything's growing, and growth adds complexity. What would you say about dealing with information well and effectively instead of getting overwhelmed?
Yeah,
because if I read 9,000 books, I would feel I would get very overwhelmed with many ideas, countless.
Well, you do a really good job, in my experience with you, of asking good questions and then listening. And yeah, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and you can't interview 8 billion. This isn't episode 8 billion. This is episode 179. But
you gave me a good go there, David. Thank you.
Excellent. I would love to see you do that. I think that would be fantastic. May you live long enough. but you can pay attention to the little bit that's right in front of you. I think it's important when a student comes into my office, the books for me vanish into the background. These books are by thousands of authors, but this one person who's in front of me, they're the one who most deserves my attention. The same is true in a coffee shop or out on the street. When I run into somebody on the street, this person deserves my attention. It might be limited. I might only have so much time to give in a day, but if we don't do that, if we don't engage in these acts of neighborly love, then I think that we run the risk of feeling lost in an ocean of people and of information. For me, you asked me, why do I love reading? One of the things that I love about reading is not just that I get to travel to other places, but as I was saying about this one book published in 1893, I get to meet other people. And that's just one person that I'm going to meet there, but I get to take that one person seriously for a little while. It is really easy to be overwhelmed right now. And I think it's helpful for us to then return to the place where we are, the people who are in front of us, to delight in those people and to delight in a little bit of reading. I do worry when people hear how much I read. I do read a lot, and it's probably an unusual amount because it's part of my job. I do worry that people will feel like they've got to somehow keep up, or that this is an accomplishment, that you've got to notch a certain number of books. And I don't think that's true at all. If somebody reads one book a year, but it's a good book and they enjoy it and they benefit from it, great. If somebody's an exceptionally slow reader and they read one book every 10 years, if they benefit from it and it's a good book and they enjoy it, fantastic. I don't think anyone should feel shame about reading a lot or reading a little, but we should be seeking to read things that bring us joy, that help us to love other people and help us to grow. And we should be seeking to help others do that too.
Thanks for saying that, because I witnessed that in the world of academics, sometimes that can get to be this competition to see who's the smartest, who reads the most, who knows the most facts.
Yeah.
And that can, whenever one perceives that they can come up short in that equation, that can be a sense of inferiority. And
right.
What would you say about that idea of academic competition?
There's structures in academia that have fostered that kind of competition, and I think it's really unfortunate, because what we ought to be fostering is care for other people, and we should be fostering wonder and curiosity, and, as I said before, delight. I was talking about Montessori school. Montessori school believes that you learn by playing, that the work of children is to play. And unfortunately, something happens at some point where we tell children, no, the work of children is work. You should accomplish. I don't know why that should be the case. Why should our lives not be lives of playfulness from start to finish? And it looks to me like some of the happiest people are people who reach their golden years playfully. Either they've played on their way there, or they've maintained a spirit of childlike playfulness into their late years, and they're still painting, they're still playing in the sand with children. They're laughing at their own mistakes and trying to dance, even if their bodies don't want to dance the way they could dance when they were 15. We should take joy in the things that we can do, rather than take shame from the things that we can't.
We should take joy. We should take joy in the things we can do, rather than take shame in the things we can't. And then you said it seems to me some of the most joyful people reach their golden years playing. Oh, it's true. Two ideas give me goosebumps.
Well, I feel like your book was a helpful guide. I know you didn't ask me to say this, and your listeners will know this. It's important. But your book is a really nice guide to living joyfully with what you can do. I really I enjoyed reading it. I liked your playful writing, your poetic writing, and I like um, your facility with questions. You ask good questions, questions that make me think, but don't make me think in a shameful way. You know, like, how dare you not have accomplished this? You make people think in a way that's joyful, like, hey, consider your life. What have you seen? What have you done? What would you like to do? Those are great questions to ask.
Well, I didn't expect that. That was beautiful. Thank you for reading the book and enjoying it.
Oh, I was glad to read it. Thanks for making it possible for me.
Speaking of paying attention and reverence, you also, from what I know of you, have a deep appreciation and love for the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more? I mean, did that start in the Catskills?
Yeah, I think it did. When I was a little kid, I was terrified of snakes and bugs, spiders. And little by little, both of my parents taught me really to appreciate the little things. My mom loved to garden, to grow food and to grow beautiful plants. My dad loves to walk in the woods with attention, and he would always just point out little things to me and show me how interesting that snail is, or how interesting that little insect on the ground is. Or he taught me about newts and great blue herons and all sorts of things like that. And over the years, for a variety of reasons, I've found myself getting more and more interested in the really small lives around us, the things that you might easily overlook. We see all bugs as bugs, all insects as bugs, and we just think of them that way. And they splat on our windshield or they land on our skin and we brush them off. I've started carrying a magnifying glass with me everywhere I go.
Wow!
So that I can, well, for two reasons. One reason is I want to be able to look more closely. It's just a little pocket hand lens, but I want to be able to, if that bug lands on my hand, I want to look at it and see, what kind of bug is that? Which class of insect is it? But also the other fun thing to do with these is to give them away to children. Because it's a way of kind of fostering wonder and cultivating curiosity in children. I work, as you mentioned, in Central America, and when I'm in Guatemala, I've met high school teachers there in rural parts of Guatemala. Guatemala is pretty diverse, but in some rural places, I've met high school biology teachers who have never touched a microscope. So if you can imagine, they somehow they got trained as biology teachers, but they never had access to the kind of lab equipment I had in middle school.
So what's that like for them? You don't have a microscope though.
So I've brought now, I don't know, 20 microscopes, 30 microscopes, something like that, to Guatemala, and I give them away to teachers. And I've brought, let's see if I have one here. I brought some of these. So this is something made by Carson, and if just in case people are only listening, I'll describe it. It's a plastic device that's got a handle, and there's a clear box on the end of the handle, and the box has a magnifying glass built into it. So like one of those little insect collection boxes. But it's also got something I can move with my thumb. When I move this with my thumb, a door closes. So if I've got an insect in my house and I want to trap it, I can set the clear box on top.
No way.
And then catch the insect, and
What
I can
a neat design.
and release it. And this allows kids who are afraid of, say, a bee that they found on their table at home or on their window, or a spider or whatever, they can catch it and then watch it safely and then release it in a safe place too. And, you know, even in a place, a biodiverse place, maybe especially in a biodiverse place like Guatemala, you know, the kids know that some of the insects there are dangerous. There are, they aren't insects, but they're scorpions and spiders, which are arthropods. They can be dangerous. Some of them can be deadly, and some of them can just be venomous and painful. There are snakes that can be deadly or that can injure you badly. And so the kids learn to kind of have a respectful distance. And when they see something in the house, they often kill it. It's too easy for us today to kill a lot of things and not even realize it. You know, spraying pesticides. We might think that we're targeting just that one spider or just that hornet's nest, but not realize that we're releasing toxins into an ecosystem that could wind up killing beneficial insects and might wind up changing the balance of things. Those insecticides might wind up in the bodies of birds or in fish, might wind up in our food. They might wind up harming the pollinators that are going to benefit our crops. So when I give these things away, these, you know, these various kinds of lenses, what I'm doing is I'm inviting children to slow down and consider the world around them in a way that's safe, that allows them to play and to engage in acts of wonder and curiosity.
Speaking of providing opportunities for people to slow down, you were telling me you took college students on a trip to Alaska, and what's that like for these students who I imagine many of them are so immersed in like contemporary culture? What's it like for them to get outside and slow down?
That I've done that class a couple of times. It's a tremendous amount of work to set it up because there's a lot of safety concerns and, you know, getting all the gear together and making sure that we've got food and fuel for our little backpacking stoves and so on. Things you can't use.
How long do you go out for? 3
or 4 weeks usually.
3 or 4 weeks?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Wow. It's a lot of work, but it's a huge payoff to get to bring students to places where, I don't know, you go to sleep in your tent at night and you wake up in the morning and there's wind blowing over the glaciers nearby, and it's July, but there's snow, and there's moose and bear, and there's salmon, and there's all kinds of flowers blooming, and 23 hours of sunlight. I mean, it's this place of wonder. It's such a treasure. It's also, as you were suggesting, you know, you're talking, you mentioned a couple times information overload. Most of the places that we wind up, we don't have any cell service and no Wi-Fi. So it's almost like giving up a drug, you know, because you got to put your phone down, or it has to go into airplane mode if you're going to keep the battery. There's no place to recharge it. So you maybe keep it in airplane mode, so you got something to take pictures with. But otherwise, you just have to be out there in nature for a while. And it's hard for the first day or two for all of us, including me, to realize I can't just look something up. If I have a question, I can't just Google it. If somebody's trying to text me, they can't. I usually bring a satellite phone that if somebody needs to, if there's an emergency, they can get in touch with us, or we can call for help. But otherwise, we're disconnected. And that disconnect from the digital world opens up the possibility of a reconnect with the natural world that is so refreshing.
How do you give the gift your dad gave you of inviting your students to observe closely when they're walking in nature?
I feel badly for anybody who hikes with me, because I will go long distances, but I go long distances by going a short distance and then stopping, and then a short distance and stopping again, because I guess I want to teach by example. I walk a little ways and I'll say, "Oh my goodness, look at that flower right there! I've never seen that one before, or I haven't seen that in a long time. What is that? What kind of mushroom is that?" So when I take my students to Alaska, I usually bring, if I'm bringing, say, 10 students, I'll bring 10 field guides, naturalist field guides, and each one is different. So every student gets one field guide. One might have the flowers field guide. One might have the fish field guide, the bird field guide, the tree field guide. And when we stop and see something, I'm like, who's got the tree field guide? What kind of tree is that right there? Who's got the fish guide? What's that swimming in the river right down there? And everybody stops and we get the books out. We start looking, and it's a great way to teach, because you don't have to grade anything. And the students stop thinking about grades. They start thinking about just the delight of being in the moment. I think I mentioned this to you as well. One of the things that I did, I've done this in most of the classes where I walk over a long distance with students. If I'm walking a long distance through the rainforests in Central America, or if I'm walking a long distance across the tundra in Alaska, I will often read to them a poem by the American poet Gary Snyder called "For the Children." Anyone can look it up, but the last 3 lines of the poem are a haiku, and they go like this. I'll recite just a little bit more of that, and then get to the haiku. It says, "One word to you and your children." And here's the haiku: "Stay together, learn the flowers, go light." And those 3 lines, "Stay together, learn the flowers, go light," they become a refrain that we talk about as we're walking mile after mile. What does it mean to stay together? Does it mean that we shouldn't stray apart from one another? Well, in bear country, that's a good policy. Does it mean that there's something inside of us that is possibly being fragmented that needs to be made whole again? What does it mean to learn the flowers? Do you mean learn the scientific names of the flowers, learn the ecosystem of the flowers, learn their smell, learn to paint them? Sometimes we'll stop and just sketch for a while. And go light. That sounds like bad grammar. Do you mean go lightly? But he wrote go light. Is it go light like go Vikings, go Packers? Or is it like, does it mean something else, that as we go, we should go as though we were light, or we're trying to become? Is it aspirational? Become as the light is, or become light. We don't answer these finally, at the end of the class, that we don't necessarily have answers, but we've spent time reflecting on poetry, reading science, observing nature, and making meals together day after day while hiking through the wilderness. I don't know how I can repeat that in the classroom where I got 50 minutes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You give me 3 weeks of that, and I'm pretty sure it'll be a life-changing experience that you won't forget for the rest of your life.
Sounds phenomenal, and like it could be almost sacred memory.
I had a funny experience the last time I taught that class. 3 weeks traveling through the wilderness in Alaska, and finally get back to Anchorage, and I drop off all the students at the airport. And I think I mentioned this to you before. I dropped the students off, and I went out to dinner with a friend, and I'm sitting at this restaurant a couple hours later, and I get a text on my phone, and I look at my phone, and there's this image of 3 forearms laid out on a table, and they've got a tattoo on each one. One says "Stay together," one says "Learn the flowers," one says "Go light." And there was a part of me that was deeply honored that they thought so much of this poem and of this class that they wanted it tattooed on their forearms. And there was a part of me that thought, I'm going to have parents who are so angry with me. What have you done to our children? We sent them to Alaska and they came back with tattoos. But at least it was poetry.
It's an amazing story. This next question, it's such an example of how we do not know people's stories until we ask questions and spend a little time and stuff. And I definitely wouldn't know this unless I I don't remember what context you told me this, and it might have been almost an aside. But you had you were involved in a major accident some years ago.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. This was back in 2015. In fact, I had just come back from teaching one of my classes in Alaska. Just started a new semester here, and I went out boating with some friends a couple hours away from Sioux Falls. And I don't remember what happened, but I'm told that our boat was traveling across a lake, and it must have hit something and stopped suddenly. And a boat that was following behind us pretty fast came over the top of us, and it hit me. I was sitting on the back of the boat, so I shattered a bunch of ribs and vertebrae and my shoulder blade, and it crushed the back of my skull. Bad, penetrating, traumatic brain injury that left me with a number of what people term invisible disabilities. Some were very visible at the time that I've mostly recovered from, but some strong invisible disabilities as well. So like a lot of this on the back of my head is not bone anymore, but titanium and methyl methacrylate, just like the stuff you make tooth crowns and dentures out of. It's a rebuilt skull. It was a long recovery. I was grateful to have people around me who supported me in that.
So what tips were? It sounds like just an amazing, complex healing experience. But you've obviously done so much healing. What tips would you give to someone struggling with a illness or trying to recover from something about yeah, just about the process?
One of the things is that every person's injuries or every person's strengths and weaknesses, for that matter, are going to be different. And I think that comparison can be it can be something that hurts us. If we say, well, I'm just like this other person who has a similar injury and they got better, why am I not getting better? We can feel really terrible about that. Or if we compare ourselves to where we were before, I used to be able to do this and I can no longer do it. That can be debilitating as well. Or if we compare ourselves to what we hoped that we would be able to accomplish soon. For instance, I came back from teaching in Alaska and doing research in Alaska, and I had a book that I was going to write. I'd sketched the book out. I had all my notes. I had thousands of photographs. I'd laid out all my notes on my desk. I was ready to write, and then I went boating with some friends.
Oh wow!
Boom. That book is gone. I don't remember much of what I had done. I have my notes, but the book itself is gone. It won't get written. And I could lament that and say, well, when I compare myself to where I thought I would be right now, well, now I feel terrible because I didn't get that book written. So those comparisons, whether they come from us or they come from other people telling us, don't worry, you'll be fine. Everything's going to be great. Those can be, they can make us feel terrible, and they can distract us from the positive things that we have in front of us and the good things that we can actually rejoice in. And I'd say, by the way, to the people who are not the ones who are injured, but to the ones who are around the people who are injured, sometimes silence is good. Like just being with people is better than saying foolish things like it's all for the best, or God has a plan, or all those other. We tend to say things to make ourselves feel comfortable rather than to care for the people who are suffering. What I found when I was recovering was the messages that I got from friends saying, I'm thinking of you, meant a tremendous amount. Some folks phrased it as, I'm holding you in my thoughts. Some said, I'm praying for you. And folks from, like, you pick a religious tradition. I got friends all over the world, Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, Christians, saying, I'm praying for you. And it just meant a lot to me to know that people were taking time out of their day, even if it was just a moment, to consider me. And I felt good. I felt like I was being healed in those moments, just fractional bits. And the people who just reached out to say, you know, I'm thinking of you, not requiring me to answer questions, not requiring me to do a lot of work, but just letting me know that they cared. That made a big difference. After that kind of brain injury, the brain uses a tremendous amount of energy, and healing was exhausting. Like, I lost the ability to write. I couldn't remember how to use a pen, couldn't remember how to type. Just trying to think full sentences sometimes would leave me needing a nap. So if somebody asked me, so tell me all the details, it would have been really hard. But giving me space to talk if I wanted to and had the energy for it made a big difference.
Your doctor, your surgeon, you told me said something really inspiring to you at one point. What was that?
Yeah, that meant so much. So I've studied a lot of foreign languages. That was part of my, it is part of my career. These books behind me are actually not all written in English. There's probably about 20 different languages represented here behind me. And I noticed as I was recovering, I was in the hospital for a few weeks. I'm sitting there on my phone scrolling through Facebook, and I got friends from around the world, like I said. And I noticed that my friends who were writing in Portuguese, I could see that it was Portuguese. I could tell you a lot about their sentences, but I couldn't understand it at all. It was gone. And I was terrified. Like, what if all the languages I've studied are gone? My doctor, my surgeon, he's from Brazil. And, you know, brain surgeons, you know, there's that old joke, what's the difference between God and a brain surgeon? And the answer is that God doesn't think he's a brain surgeon. You know, the brain surgeons are famous for not having a whole lot of time for their patients, or patients for their patients. But I said to him, Doctor, you know, before I go, before you go, I got one question for you. I lost my ability to read Portuguese, and I'm afraid. And he turned and he slowed down in a way that was really quite remarkable for a brain surgeon, or really for anybody. He looked me in the eye and he said, Dr. O'Hara, don't worry. It's still in there. Give it time. And I felt, when he said that, I just felt like this peace pass over me. The anxiety went away. And here's the best part of it. I think I mentioned this to you before. If you'd asked me moments before, how do you say thank you in Portuguese, I would not have been able to tell you. But the first word to come to mind when he said that to me was obrigado.
Wow.
And it was like it's like his kind words, his caring words unlocked that in me and made it possible for me to say my first, I'm going to start crying, say my first word in Portuguese after losing it and feeling like it was gone forever.
Wow.
And to be honest, you know, I found I was like an A+ student in foreign languages before, and I'm now like a D+, C- student. There's still a lot that's gone. Part of that is just aging, and part of that is brain injury. And I'm just grateful to be alive, and grateful for people whose kind words in the right moment, or who's who showed up and were with me. My wife more than anyone, but many other people as well. Those things made a huge difference. Just caring about people. You don't have to have magic words, but just caring makes a big difference. You
don't have to have magic words, but just caring makes a big difference. Wow.
Yeah.
So I ask every guest this, and you just with the book too. Thank you. So I'll ask you, what does doing your imperfect best mean to you, David O'Hara?
Yeah. Well, it means looking to role models like you, people who have, you're a gifted poet, and that poetry, the work of poetry is always, it's always imperfect, right? I mean, we don't write perfect poems, but we write the best poems we can, and then we write the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one might be a little better, or might be a little worse. You just you play with the words, you keep playing. And, like I said before, doing your imperfect best is rejoicing in the things that you can do rather than feeling shame in the things that you can't do. It's embracing the goodness that is around us, looking at the small lives that are nearby, and rather than being afraid of the bee, kind of taking out your lens and looking closely and recognizing that our lives are full of those things, that we are the insects. We have habits, and we have weaknesses, and we have disabilities, and we have just attitudes and ideas that are going to plague us sometimes, and we can swat at them and try to get rid of them, or we can say, hey, this is part of who I am, and let's live with this, and I'll try to change the things that I can, and I'll embrace the things that I cannot, and recognize that that's also part of this pointillist painting or tapestry that is my life. And what a joy to get to live this life.
Wow. The headline of this interview is Cultivating Curiosity. What would you say to us as we wrap up about cultivating curiosity?
So I sometimes ask my students to consider it's a little bit of a hard question, so brace yourself. When is it that you learned to stop having fun? And for lots of us as adults, I think that we have at some point in our school or in our work learned to stop having fun. And I want to be careful about asking that question. I don't want to demand that anybody answer it, because it's a hard question. There's often hard things behind it. But when we can get ourselves to the place where we can ask that question safely and quietly by ourselves, it might expose to us something that we can actually change. Like maybe we cared too much about what other people thought about us, our teachers, our parents, our lovers, whatever it might be, and our boss. If we can identify that, we might be able to start to have fun again. And I think, cultivating curiosity, cultivating wonder, so much of it has to do with just having fun, like looking at the little things, and allowing that ant that's walking across your arm not to be a pest, but to be this six-legged wonder. Like how do they work? How do they do that?
And what do they think about all day?
Right. There's a guy, Lars Chitka. I know we're close to that time here, but Lars Chitka is a scientist. I think he lives in the UK, and some of his work has been with bees, giving bees toys. No scientist apparently has thought to do this before. He gives them toys, and you know what the bees do with the toys? They play. The bees play with toys.
Oh my gosh!
And why did we not think of that before? Maybe the ants are playing too. Maybe all sorts of things. We've asked this question scientifically, why do birds sing? And we come up with all the answers: to warn others, to defend their territory, to call for their mate, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe, just maybe, they sing for the same reason we do, because it's fun and it's beautiful. Like maybe the world is really wonderful, and we should figure out what gets in the way of us seeing it that way, and see what we can do to help others to see it as a really wonderful place too.
Well, this has been so very inspiring. Thank you so much
Oh,
my new friend. I
thank you.
appreciate it. You
Thank
being
you.
on the show. Wow. Life is such an adventure. I went through more of my life than I like to think about, feeling kind of bored sometimes, but really, there's endless things to do, endless people to meet, and kind people and knowledgeable people. Isn't isn't Dr. David O'Hara just so amazing? And I encourage you not only to be amazed by him and his insights, but also realize that you have brilliance within you, and really be inspired by what David said to explore your own brilliance more. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. Please comment if you have questions or reflections. And tune in next week for another great, awkwardly awesome podcast guest. Thanks for being you.